Hey folks, we have a great show for you today. We're talking with Justin Foster about changing systems, being a heretical leader, and fucking shit up to make it better.
Welcome to The Thinking Leader, brought to you by Red Team Thinking. Bad leaders react, good leaders plan, and great leaders think. Each week, you'll get new ideas and insights from business executives, military experts, and innovative thought leaders to help you lead more effectively and better navigate your complex world. Now, here are your hosts, best-selling business author and top-rated leadership speaker, Bryce Hoffman, and former RAF Wing Commander and business agility coach, Marcus Dimbleby.
Hello and welcome to The Thinking Leader. Today, we have a very special guest. Justin Foster is our brand guru. He coaches leaders who are called on to make systemic change, and he's here today to talk to you about how to be an authentic leader, how to lead real change, and how to represent yourself in today's world. So without further ado, Mr. Foster, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Bryce. Thank you, Marcus. Always a pleasure to meld our brains. Something always good happens when we talk. So.
You have this secret power, and I'm going to share it with our viewers and listeners, which is that I've never met anybody who has such an ability to listen to other people, which is a rare skill right there, and to take in what they say and what they're talking about, and to synthesize it, and then to spit out like one sentence that sums up everything. So a lot of you who have followed our work and who've listened to the show or have been in one of our workshops know that one of the things that we talk about a lot is the fog of BS that companies surround themselves with. And, you know, we talk about how Red Team Thinking is designed to cut through that fog of BS. That's from Justin. That was the product of Justin and I spending a day and a half together going around San Francisco, drinking espresso, going to museums, and then all of a sudden, Justin, we were sitting at Cafe Trieste, actually, in San Francisco, a very appropriate place, the famous Beat Cafe. And Justin said, you know what you do? He said, all these companies create a fog of bullshit around them, and you come in and cut through that BS. And it was like, wow, that is exactly what we're trying to do. And I've never thought about it so clearly. So that's Justin's superpower. How do you do that, Justin?
Well, thank you for the compliment, and it's something. It's a gift I've always had. It got me in trouble a lot as a kid. Adults want you to listen to them. They say that adults, teachers, and parents and preachers they say they want you to listen. What they don't want you to do is to repeat back what you actually mean, what they actually mean. So I've always had I've always had three curiosities. I'm 51. These curiosities have taken many forms, but the one was this obsession, curiosity, fascination with language, and language as a currency of ideas. And later on in life, I learned through neuroscience that language is the bridge between the left and the right brain. It's the bridge between the material and the mystical. You know, so it says in the Christian Bible, in the beginning was the Word. You know, so the language is the beginning of everything. Second obsession or curiosity is what I now would call consciousness, but it was just this general idea that there's something bigger than us out there, and whatever you want to call it, you know, it doesn't matter to me what you want to call it. It's this idea that there's this force or energy out there, and it seems to me that what our human brains do is we tend to overcomplicate what we really want to say, and what I think it's born of, especially with men, it's born of insecurity. It's born of this idea that I have to say something right or people won't like me. And it's very subconscious. So what I do is I tune in to what you really want to say, and I just use my love of language to repeat it back in a way where you're like, yeah, that. because I never tell anyone what to say. Never. I mean,
I've said
in the sense of
that
language.
many a time talking to you. Exactly that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you just said it in the background about a minute ago.
And my third, and this is all related, my third obsession has always been, ever since I was a little kid, is, and I still have this today, and I'll quote Mark Cuban, I just like to fuck shit up. I like to deconstruct. Deconstruction is interesting to me. Like, how something is made is not that interesting. How you deconstruct something is fascinating. And I think that part of what draws me to you guys, other than, we have similar values and, we're all in each other's mutual admiration society, is that we're kind of working on
hair.
Yeah, Marcus's hair and accent. Bryce's wit and use of language. But we're all kind of working on the same problem. And but it circles back to listening. You guys do the same thing. That's why you're good at what you do. It's not you're not good at what you do because you have some answer they don't have. You're good at what you do.
We don't have answers.
No answers.
You're right.
Yeah.
But you think about when you're competing against like the big consulting companies, they get paid to have answers. You guys get paid to find the right questions.
If you notice my shelf, right, in the consultancy shelves, you'll see what I call the cookie cutter models.
Yes.
And what they do is when you have a problem, they go to their shelf and they take off their cookie cutter and they bring it to your organization, and hopefully that will provide you a solution. It doesn't.
Right.
Because the cupboard is bare. In reality, you have to, exactly as you talked about, Justin, you've got to deconstruct these problems and listen to the people who are facing into those things and help them understand as much as we do and help them use these tools and techniques as you talked about.
It's like one of my favorite Alan Mulally quotes. When he came to take over Ford back in 2006, and from Boeing, and everyone at General Motors and Chrysler was chuckling about, Ford's so desperate they brought in a guy, from Boeing to put tail fins back on their cars, and stuff like this. He doesn't know anything about the automobile industry. And I remember I was still a journalist, and I asked him, I said, we had just started to kind of bond, and I had a one-on-one interview with him a few months after he started. And I said, everyone's laughing at you in this town, in Detroit. And he said, why? And I said, they say you don't know anything about the auto industry. He said, they're right. I don't know anything about the auto industry, but I know it doesn't work.
That's all I need.
It's like, that's all I need to know.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And it's not an auto problem; it's a people problem.
Right. And I think what's related to this, though, is this kind of Western civilization, social conditioning, the obsession with formulas. And the only formula that works is the formula for selling formulas. And that's essentially what consulting is. Consulting is the selling of formulas, often by emotionally damaged people, selling to emotionally damaged people. So what it ends up being, consulting really is monetized codependency. It's like rich people having going to therapy.
There it goes. That's another. There's a Justin gem right there.
Monetized codependence. I'm right. I can't write quick enough at the moment.
We're gonna have to have in the show notes on this one. We're gonna have to have a list of Justin gems.
Yeah.
Consulting is monetized codependency. My gosh, that is so. I mean, there's so much to unpack there. But it's so true, and it really gets to the whole insecurity of leaders who lean on, the big consulting firms, because no one's going to get mad at you as long as your slides have a McKinsey stamp on it or whatever.
Right.
But it goes back to this social conditioning that you mentioned, doesn't it? It's this Western civilization, and within that civilization we've created, we have this social condition, and it's inherently male as well, as we talked about, these insecurities.
Yeah. And I think you play off of that. You play off of this like insecure males in power. Is what's happening in large organizations is people are not nearly as powerful as they think they are. Like, the title doesn't mean shit. It really doesn't. And so, but if your identity is around your sense of power, then what you're going to do is you're going to gravitate towards people that are trying to make you safe within the role of power that you think you have. And again, that's what consultants do. Right. I mean, how many times does a consultant come in going, well, the problem is you're emotionally damaged, you're spiritually dead, and you need to be doing something else. No, they don't do that. You know, they don't do that.
Said no consultant ever.
Right. And I think this goes to like this macro thing that you guys are working on, I'm working on, is the power dynamic has shifted to people that actually give a shit about people. And where there's the humility to listen and the humility to question. But if you haven't been taught how to think and
the humility not to have the answer.
Exactly. Which again, what is why, you know, look at all the data. Women executives, whether they be in professional, you know, CEOs or leaders of countries, outperform male leaders exponentially now, as far as the overall like performance of an organization. And I think I think that's why it's this flipping. The way I refer to it is the kings are in service to the queens, and that's the proper order of things, both spiritually with our heart and our mind in service to our heart, and not the other way around.
It's interesting because when you say that, you make me think about a conversation I had a couple of years ago with a client who worked for a U.S. company that had a lot of operations in Vietnam, and he was based in Vietnam. And he was saying, you know, in Vietnam, there's not a single company that has, you know, hiring quotas or has, gender awareness days or things like that, and yet there's more female executives. He said it was, I'm just taking his word for this. Haven't seen actual study, but he said there's more than half the executives that I deal with, he said, are women at Vietnamese companies. And he said it's just because they simply promote the best person who's the most effective leader. It's not and that's, you know, it's problem solved.
Right.
And I love what you were saying there, Justin, about, you know, this power dynamic is shifting to the people who give a shit about people. And that's one of the things that I've seen really fall off the cliff in the last sort of 10, maybe more years. And if you think about it, old school, we were doing project management. It was always people, process, platform, or people, process, technology. And then as we've gone through this digital transition, that's flipped and it's now focused all on the digital, the tech, then the processes, and the sort of people who were really the lead singer of the trio has kind of just disappeared. And it's kind of an afterthought. And I really sense now the leaders who are making a difference and the leaders who are standing out head and shoulders above the crowd are those people who focus on their people. You know, Branson's a great advocate of that. You know, you focus on your people, they focus on the customer. They'll focus on your tech and the outcomes that you need.
Yeah. And if you think about it from a well-being perspective, we can learn that dairy farmers know a lot more about productivity than traditional business leaders. Dairy farmers know that if you're kind to the cows, they produce more milk. And it's true. They give them massages, they pipe in music, they have foot washers. And so everyone, there's this brain kind of bloviating about like productivity and Taco Tuesdays and, you know, culture. And it's all this sort of, you know, word salad that doesn't really have any sort of integrated belief system. And what they want is what they want to achieve, which is basically only two things in business, ultimately, is velocity, and which is productivity, speed to market, and then productivity. So if you have velocity and productivity, you're going to get something that will come from that. But velocity and productivity do not work if your people are not liberated. And this is my challenge. When I hear leaders talk about, well, our biggest asset, or our people are our biggest asset. And I'm like, man, they're not assets. They're not assets. They're the only thing that matters. And my further rant on this is the reason that they view them as assets is that these leaders are disconnected from their hearts. And if you do not know how to treat yourself, you do not know how to treat others. As the greatest brander of all time said, you love your neighbor as yourself. I would paraphrase that to love your team member as yourself. So,
and it's a two-way street, like you say. And there's another thing that I would put in there that's also part of the secret sauce, and that's purpose. If you look at the organizations that are most successful, the organizations that really change the world, it's because they have a team of people that's united by a sense of purpose to do that. And that purpose can be something altruistic. It could be something even materialistic, but it's a it's a purpose. It's like, if you go back and look at the early days of Atari, they weren't trying to change the world in any sort of altruistic way, but there was this group of people that came around that company in its early days who saw the potential of digital entertainment and were like, oh, there's so much cool shit we could do. And, let's stay up late and work 18 hours a day to do it so we can get it to market fast. And it wasn't because some boss was, saying like, I expect you to ship this video game in the next, 30 days or you're all, going to get docked to pay. No, it's because people wanted to. And then if you look at a lot of times organizations like that over time, Atari, I think, ended up getting bought out by a bigger company and stuff. And then they imposed just the kind of standard, productivity models on it, and that you kind of crush all of that. But that's a key too, isn't it? Purpose.
It is, because and I think it goes back to this: is that innovation requires liberation. You cannot, and you look at the scope of history, and you hear about like in World War II, what the Allied soldiers later in the war talking about like getting hit by bullets in the chest, and then they would just because the slave labor, the Nazi slave labor, had shorted the powder in the bullets, and that was their act of rebellion against tyranny. And that's a very stark and dark historical example, but is that you look at where people are free to be themselves. This is why I'm a big fan of anything that involves inclusivity and DEI, and I don't necessarily like woke washing businesses that kind of give lip service to this, but like sincere DEI, sincere ESG initiatives, those type of things. What they're doing is they are liberating people to be themselves, and that's the great, like, in order to do that, in order to liberate people, they have to learn how to think for themselves, which means they're not following some year-long strategic plan like Good Little Robots. I mean, that's where red team thinking comes in. It's ultimately about not just teaching people how to cut through the bullshit. It's how to create true liberation and true autonomy by allowing people to think for themselves, but especially if they're organized, like you said, Bryce, around a purpose. It's exponentially different. It's obviously different.
And it also gets to one of my favorite Eisenhower quotes, which is, plans are worthless, but planning is everything. So you come up with the strategic plan for a year, but you recognize that you don't know what the world's going to look like a year from now. You don't know what the world's going to look like these days, a month from now, or a week from now. And so that plan is just a guideline. And you enable, you empower. I'm going to use the word empower because there's no other better word I can think of, even though it's a little bit hackneyed. You empower your team to adjust that plan, to pivot, to turn, to change course, to zig, to zag, to swerve, in order to get to the objectives that you're trying to get to, even if it doesn't hew entirely to the plan, because that's what you have to do to succeed in the world today.
And it goes back to what you said earlier, Justin. It's that empowerment is allowing you the ability to deconstruct the plan. And you can only do that if you've been engaged in the planning, because you understand the fundamental construct of the intent of that plan. And if you see, what we often see is, well, these plans are created and they just get handed off to someone to deliver it. Even if there was planning of that plan, if the executioners of the plan aren't engaged up front in the planning, then again, you're creating this almost a wall or a gap between the knowledge of the plan and the execution of that plan in purpose.
In the military, they talk a lot about commander's intent.
Absolutely.
Right.
And that's really what we're trying to bring to business, too, because it's a very powerful concept. I mean, it's, one of the best stories that illustrates the power of commander's intent that people might be familiar with is, was told in the HBO miniseries Band of Brothers. It's a true story. It's still taught at West Point. Easy Company, which, is a group of paratroopers that dropped into Normandy on D-Day, and they had a plan. They had a very specific plan where they were supposed to land, what they were supposed to do when they landed, and what they were supposed to, what their objective was. And it, of course, all went to hell the second that they stepped out of their planes before they even hit their ripcords, because the planes dropped them all in the wrong place. That, everyone was scattered by anti-aircraft fire. Most of them didn't find each other, and stuff like that. But their commander, once he got, all the guys he could find who'd made it, to somewhere, close to where they were supposed to be, rather than saying, right, I'm missing most of my guys, we're not where we're supposed to be, but we're going to have to figure out how to get back on the plan and carry out the mission. What he did instead was say, right, what's the real objective here today? We're trying, our job is, we jumped in before the landing craft hit the beaches. Our job is to try to protect the guys on the beaches and to do whatever we can do to give them a little bit more space to establish a beachhead in occupied Europe. So they looked around, they found that, they could see these German 88s, hammering the beaches, and they said, right, that's not our mission, but that's the commander's intent. That's why we were dropped behind enemy lines. So let's go. It would really help the guys on the beaches if we could take those guns out. And they put together a plan, with the forces they had, and they went and they took out all these German guns, and they bought space for people. That was the commander's intent. Yeah. Commander's intent, I don't remember what the original mission was, to capture a bridge or something like that, control some road intersection to keep the Germans from reinforcing. They said, to hell, we can't do that, but we can do this, and that's the intent. Right. Businesses need to think that way too.
They do. And this comes to the why, what, and the how, doesn't it? We need to understand the why of these things. We're doing it for the purpose. We need to be given the what and the direction, but we need to let these people figure out the how and do that themselves, as you said in that example, Bryce. What is it we need to do? Protect our inbound troops. Why are we doing that? To enable, defeat of the enemy. How do we do that? Down to you. Yeah. What are the situation you're facing into? What are the assets we have available to us? Where is the enemy? Where's the friendly forces? Wherever it's happening in business. That how is something that we need to unleash, and that goes back to that innovation. Without liberation means you're going to get nothing.
Yes. I have a keynote that I've been giving that's, heretical, and it's called The Art of Unfinishing. And it's, the idea is that business, because most businesses are still run by men are obsessed with finishing. You can take that however you'd like. There's this mythology, this mythology that there is some sort of end point, and it's an illusion. Yes. Van Gogh said, "I've never finished a painting." This is what inspired the term "art of unfinishing." He said, "I've never finished a painting. I just stopped painting it." And it's this idea that fluidity is the norm. The river flows, the banks change, and we've got it backwards. And it goes to, again, to kind of this Western. And I'm not a critic of Western civilization, but I am a critic of binary thinking, where art is the better answer and creativity is the better answer. And so I think, to your great example and from Band of Brothers, is it goes back to liberation. If you are free to make decisions in the name of the higher purpose, not the plan, then you will figure out how to embrace the unfinishing, how to embrace acceptance. And then what you're doing is you're serving, like, this is why I think companies or organizations that are run by people that are purpose oriented are so much more effective than companies run by people that are process oriented. Now, they're not in competition with each other, but process will dominate purpose all of the time. It's a kind of business moral relativism, which is our values are terrible, but our shareholder value is high. And it's that kind of moral relativism that karma will come and kick you in the ass. Yeah.
When I was after I quit being a journalist, and I was a consultant briefly, just a consultant of one, after my first book came out, before I realized that consulting was not what I wanted to be doing. One of the things I used to with every client I would start with is what is your why? Simon Sinek saying, what is your why? Why are you doing what you're doing? And I learned it from my mentor, Alan, because that was the first thing he did when he came to Ford is figure out why are we even showing up for work every day? And, so many companies, I mean, it just became kind of laughable, the CEO or the president or whoever I was working with would say, to increase shareholder value. and I'd say, first time somebody said, I was in China, I was in Shanghai. I was meeting with the president of a U.S. based tire company that they were U.S. based, but all their operations were in China. And I said, "What is your why? Why do you show up for work? You know, not just you, but your entire team." And he said, "Well, it's spelled out in our mission statement. It's to increase shareholder value." And I said, "Then why not just get in the porn industry or cigarettes?" Right. He's like, looked at me like he's like, "What?" And I said, "Well, the profit margins there are just a lot higher than making automobile tires. And if the only reason you're showing up is to increase shareholder value, why bother making tires?"
Yes.
And
totally.
And he's like, "Wow." And he's like, "You're right." He's like that. And I said, there's got to be more to it than that, because otherwise, how are you going to inspire your team? How are you going to get people to do the heavy lifting you want to do to move your company forward? It's got to be about something more than that. And I'm not saying it has to be about, saving baby seals and stuff like that, but it's got to be about, at Ford, what Alan came up with was, Henry Ford's original vision was democratizing technology. Mm-hmm. And if you look about it, that's what Ford's doing right now, still to this day, because Alan put them back on that track. The electric pickup that they've launched is a lot cheaper than a Tesla, and it's aimed at every person in America. And it's about taking something that was a technology that was just for the elite and making it available to the masses. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't have to be about it's great if it's about liberating the soul of humanity, but it has to be about something more than increasing shareholder value.
And I think to that, I get asked this a lot when people are like, so what do you mean by like systemic change? What does that mean when I coach leaders called to create systemic change? Well, there's this basically a kind of a simple like mark for this, and that is, what are you doing to contribute to humanity? If you have a direct line of sight to contributing to humanity, then you're creating systemic change, because ultimately you're either rehumanizing or you're dehumanizing. And dehumanizing is forcing people to come into the office when they don't need to. Bigger than that, and this is why I loathe the industry that I've spent years in, of convincing people through marketing, mostly gaslighting them, using their fears and insecurities to convince them to buy shit they don't need, much of which harms them economically or harms the environment. And that to me is dehumanizing to do that. And so if you're a company or your organization, like to your point, Bryce, you don't have to be a social entrepreneur or a B Corp or any of that stuff or run a nonprofit. God bless all those people for what they're doing. But if you feel in your heart that the people are more important than anything else, and you are working to liberate people to be themselves, to pursue happiness, to have a sense of well-being in the world, then you are creating systemic change. I think of Jessica Alba's company, Honest Co. That's a great example of a company that is heart-based, and she's a great listener, legendary listener, if you from the people that are around her, and it's all towards rehumanizing a very important phase of life for parents. I think that there's that. There's Sarah Blakely with Spanx, rehumanizing. Mm-hmm. Dove, rehumanizing.
I love that. Rehumanizing, not dehumanizing. This is a great conversation. We'll take a short break and we will continue it when we get back. Hey folks, Bryce here. If you like what you're hearing on today's episode and you want to learn more about Red Team Thinking, you want to do Red Team Thinking, learn how to use Red Team Thinking as a leader to make better decisions and better navigate today's complex world, I've got a perfect opportunity coming up for you. On September 14th, Marcus and I will be leading a live online course, the Red Team Thinking Bootcamp. You can find out all about it on our website, redteamthinking.com, or click the link in the show notes. This is our introductory course. It's just $100, and it will give you a solid foundation in what red team thinking is, where it comes from, how it works, the science and psychology behind red team thinking. And most importantly of all, we will arm you with some basic red team thinking tools that you can start using right away to better navigate your complex world. September 14th, online, worldwide. Check it out. I hope to see you there.
Justin, it's fascinating how you're talking there about this work-life integration and the balance that we've created very quickly since COVID. You know, pre-COVID, we were trying for many years to get this remote working capability, different organizations, whether we work from home 2, 3, 4, 5 days a week, and then instantly we made it happen. But what we're already starting to see, and you can see it in the news and LinkedIn, is this regression back to how we were trying to behave before COVID. And I'm struggling to understand that. And workforce, you know, people in the workplace are struggling to see, why are these individuals reverting back to this way of thinking?
I have the same. I was thinking about that actually just recently. Somebody that I admire greatly, her name is Sarah Hawley, and she owns a company called Remotely. She's the first recruiting firm that recruits only virtual workers. And she and I were having this similar conversation about this regression. It's such a good word for it. And I think it ultimately is this. If your power, it goes back to power dynamic. If your power is an illusion based off of hierarchies inside of a power structure, usually based off of title or tenure, which are two terrible ways to determine somebody's power. If that's where you derive your power, then therefore that produces insecurity, and insecurity, especially in men, inevitably results in a desire to control. So, you know, it boils down to if you're disassociated from your own kind of true self, you're either going to be a people controller or a people pleaser. So men tend to lean towards people controllers. That's what narcissism is, and gaslighting and all that typically is more masculine behavior. And this is what it is. It's like, I can't, if you're not here, I can't control you. And what's happening then is that businesses, are forced with is they're basically only able to retain people if they have this, like, you have to come into the office. The only people they're retaining is the people that kind of identify, their identity comes from their work. They're kind of like incels with better jobs,
right?
In some ways. And so,
well, in some cases, people who are doing creative stuff and things that they want to do.
No,
let's not be too ungenerous
in that case. But what you're not getting is independent thinkers that are autonomous in their behavior, because that's a threat to control. Yeah, that's a threat to control.
That is so true. And let me tell you, back in I can remember this so vividly. Back in 1999, I was asked to do it. I was working for the Contra Costa Times in the East Bay of San Francisco Bay Area. I was a technology reporter there, one of the tech team. And this was back when newspapers had staffs and, had teams rather than, one person, trying to cover everything. And I was assigned to do a story about remote work because some of the tech companies in Silicon Valley had started to set up, satellite offices in like the suburbs and stuff, and letting people, work from there one day a week. And I talked to a bunch of companies. I talked to PeopleSoft was one, Oracle, different companies like this, and I wrote a story, front page story, and it was, the headline was something like "The future of work may be at home," and it was. I talked to experts at Stanford and Berkeley and stuff about how this was going to unlock this new level of productivity and creativity and all this stuff. It's a totally positive piece and really well read. And my boss said, "This is great. It's a wonderful piece. We're getting a lot of good feedback, on this." I said, "Great." I said, I was thinking as I was working on this, why don't I work from home, a day a week? And she, without even pausing, said, "Absolutely not." And she did. And she said, and I said, "Why?" I said, "We literally just ran a front page article telling people that this is the future and that they should embrace it." And her response, again, without even pausing, was, because if I let you do it, I have to let everybody do it. And it became this, whole thing. Now, here's the thing to think about this, because I then bring this up to every boss I have for the rest of my career in journalism. Not one of them was willing until the very end, when they were more worried about me leaving than they were about controlling me. Not one of my bosses until the very end of my career was willing to even let me work 1 day a week from home. In a career in which it's regularly the case that you go out into the field and don't come into the office at all, file your story, from an event or a conference or something like that. And I would say to every single one of my editors, you're fine with me going and, spending the day at a Ford factory and filing a story and never seeing me, but I can't work from home 1 day a week? And they'd all be like, no, absolutely not. And to your point, Justin, one of my bosses, who was finally honest enough to say it, I said, why? And he said, because I can't yell at you if you're at home.
Right.
And he was not joking. He said, because I can't yell at you if you're at home. And that goes right to your thing about that.
Yeah. And this goes back to this, we talk about a lot, and it's a dirty word where I come from in the military, command and control. And it's the whole point of what mission command and commander's intent was there to do. And I think people misunderstand it. I love command and control. You have to have command and control. But the thing is, they're not welded together. The and is a rubber band. And what you need to do is retain command and understand what that means. But then you need to push and release that control. And it goes back to exactly what you said, Justin. If these insecure, usually males who are on a power streak, are unable and incapable of delegating that control, then they pull the reins tighter. And in doing so, they actually make the situation far worse than by doing nothing. And we're seeing this so often. And I think it's this understanding of, I have this title, I have this position, therefore I must be seen to be in control, seen to be, keeping and taking control rather than relinquishing it. But when you relinquish it, when you just let go, the freedom that your people then gain from that, and if they've got clear direction and understanding and purpose, then the innovation starts to flourish.
It's kind of like energy distribution. If you are filling up you're filling up your days trying to manage people, and I don't know if Rose Bryce was the first to say this, but you lead people and you manage numbers, and so many people get that backwards. So you spend your days, you spend all this energy managing, air quotes, people, which is like a massive energy tax, So you think about doing the opposite. What if you spent your days liberating people? Then what happens is not only are they going to have more space to to increase the velocity of creativity and innovation, you're going to,
correct.
You're going to, if you're the leader of people and you view your job as liberating them, what do you get to create with that? What do you get to create with that space when you have a lot less drama and bullshit to deal with? I think the other thing that's part of this too is a rampant fear of polarization. What I mean by that is there's still a tendency, there's authoritarian impulses within organizations to try to make everything the same. And so they view polarity differences as threats.
Yes.
And again, this is why I'm a big believer in DEI initiatives. DEI initiatives like the first 10% of what needs to be done, but they are at least embracing the idea that different is good. And so when
particularly diversity of thought.
And when I talk about diversity, I talk about the classic DEI stuff, but also neurodiversity. 25 to 30% of your workforce is neurodiverse.
Yeah.
I have ADHD. Business is not really set up for me to operate with it. That's one of the reasons I don't work for a company, is because they don't harness that. They try to control it. And so anyway, looping around to this idea of polarity though, is that I think again, I'm disparaging men to some extent, but that's who's in charge a lot of the time. So it is what it is. That's what I say. A lot of the world's problems look like they came from people that look a lot like me. So is that they fear polarity, so they try to control it, and that's what these like forced. compliance, but also like a conformity as a social pressure norm within companies. And I think back to, his name escapes me, but he was a high ranking guy at Verizon, and he started wearing jeans to work, and I asked him, what did you why you do it? What'd you do? And he goes, I just thought, let's see what they say. This is like, he was like a high ranking guy. He wasn't part of the C-suite, but he was high ranking. And he was, let's see what they say. And they didn't say anything. Right. So I kept doing it. And then I told my team to do it. And roughly about a year after he started wearing jeans to work, Verizon changed their work dress code policy, because it was one person going, this is fucking stupid, and let's see what happens.
Oh, this goes to something that we always teach our clients, which is, it's a concept that I got from the U.S. Army called My 15%. And it's so powerful because it gets right to this. When the U.S. Army started deploying red teaming and created the red teaming university at Fort Leavenworth and all this stuff, U.S. Army loves to do psychological surveys and monitor the psychology of officers and things like this. So when I was going through the course, we had tons of psychological assessments and stuff, and when they were doing it with the first few cohorts that went through the red team leader course, they found an interesting thing. They found that people's enthusiasm for red teaming and through the course was going up, 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 up until right before they graduated. And then it started to plummet. And why did it start to plummet? It started to plummet because the officers were thinking like, oh, this has been great, but now I got to go back to my unit. And I know my general is a complete asshole who doesn't like to be questioned. Yeah. And when I start trying to use these tools to surface alternative perspectives and to challenge our thinking in a constructive way, he is going to shoot me down so fast. And it really started to have an negative impact on morale. So they wanted to address this because they didn't want people going through this amazing program and then going back to their units all depressed, about it. So they put a group of organizational psychologists to work on it, and they came up with this concept called My 15%. And it's based on, as I understand, at least as I was taught it, it's based on a fact that's been surfaced by organizational psychologists that in any organization, doesn't matter if it's the military, a company, a university, whatever it is, an NGO, no matter what your job is, there's always at least 15% of it that you have an ability to directly impact. And it doesn't matter whether you're on the C-suite or on the factory floor. It doesn't matter if you're a scientist or a janitor cleaning up the lab. There's at least 15%. In some cases it might be more, but there's at least 15% of what you do that you could change. And so the advice, the reason what the Army started teaching was this little module called My 15%, was that if you find yourself back in your unit and your general, your senior leader doesn't want to implement these tools and stuff that you just spent the past several months learning, don't just give up. Focus on your 15%. Figure out what is the 15% of your job that you can have a positive impact on and try to change that. And if you do that, it may not happen overnight. It may not happen next year. But over time, you will start to change the direction of the organization. And what you just described, Justin, at Verizon, that is an example of someone taking their 15% or a piece of their 15% and making a change and then having it turn the whole organization. I love that.
I know. It reminds me of one of my favorite sayings from Margaret Mead, where she says, never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has.
Yes, and I have this...
And you just got to, goes back to what you said earlier, though. You've got to have that courage.
And it's funny, as I have, my partner at home, Virginia, has her PhD is in communication for social change, and she's a complexity science. And we have this running debate that will probably be a podcast. We're really honestly thinking about launching a podcast because I think our conversations are fascinating. Maybe nobody else will, but it's this idea that I said to her, and she's been a lifelong activist. She's the president of the largest feminist organization in Central America, very group oriented. I said, groups don't change shit. People do. Individuals do. I was highly offensive to the former Sandinista.
Yeah.
I bet.
My point
I expect nothing
being
less.
Somewhat some hubris in that, of course. I'm being provocative. Is though at the end of the day, individuals, like Margaret Mead's quote, Marcus is perfect for that. It's individuals making small changes that lead to big changes, and history is full of that. There's been no point in history where a large group of people did anything except make things worse. So, and so
absolutely,
when you look at it this way, that's why I talk about a calling, like to create systemic change, whether that be massive systemic change like societal issues like climate change or something, or more microsystemic change like you can wear jeans to work. That's a calling, and it's only going to be based off of historical numbers, going to be maybe 10% of your leaders that are willing to do it. My favorite story, and I won't go the whole thing, people can look it up on Wikipedia, is Billy Mitchell is a great example. He was an army officer.
Oh, yeah.
He was a pro
Absolutely.
Air Force. And the Navy, which ran the military at the time, this is in between World War I and World War II, was so offended by him that they had him court-martialed, and he spent some time at Leavenworth. And he is now the only person in the history of the U.S. military to have a airplane named after him, the B-25 Mitchell bomber. One man being a heretic changes everything, from Jesus to Buddha to Muhammad to Martin Luther King Jr. to Harvey Milk to whatever. One person being a heretic changes everything. It might get you killed. You might lose your job, but it does change things.
Yeah, well, exactly. And it goes back to those two key phrases, the two key words in that statement from Margaret: thoughtful and committed. These aren't irrational, these aren't reactive, these are well thought out, intended behaviors committed to a purpose, to a cause, to a calling. And you get those two things together and people start to follow it. And we're seeing that with what we're trying to do. We see Red Team Thinking as a calling, as a movement, as a insurgency. We want people to join it because they are feeling it. That's the whole point. Once you get people feeling something, it's so much easier to make it move with the momentum you need it to do.
And you better be attracted, if you're going to do this, if you're going to be the hero in the story, you better be attracted to subversiveness. Like if you're trying to be like khaki pants guy all the time, like just blending in, you're not going to do shit. You're working within the system, fine, great. Your team members like you, but there's no systemic change. And is that you got to take risks.
You got to take risks.
And I think that's why, to go back to the David Hawkins's map of consciousness, you got to get to the courage line. Here's what's on the other side of the courage line. The first thing, if you look at that map, is reason, rational thought. That's what's there. That's the first thing, is the logical brain gets engaged and goes, oh, this is stupid. Let's find a better way to do it. But it's leading towards a greater state of liberation or enlightenment, or whatever you want to call it.
There you go. So have the courage to be subversive in your organization. Where could people get in touch with you if they want to learn more about what you're doing, if they want to learn more or follow your work?
Yeah, thank you, Bryce. Thank you, Marcus. The easiest way, I'm pretty findable, is just find me on LinkedIn, Justin Foster. Just search for Justin Foster. And if you're on Instagram and you want a higher level of provocation, just follow me at Foster Thinking on Instagram. And I post a lot of stuff on there that's spiritual, philosophical, and sometimes it goes over to LinkedIn, and it's about to be even more. I think I've avoided, to some extent, being somewhat vulnerable here, being more public on LinkedIn about some of my views related to what is required of leadership. But like we said, you need a little bit of courage to be subversive. So you follow me on either one of those, though.
Excellent. Check it out, folks. Great conversation.
Thank you for tuning in to The Thinking Leader. Check the show notes for more information about the topics covered in this episode. There, you'll also find a link to our free assessment. Click on it right now to find out if you are a Red Team thinker with a Red Team culture.